Good afternoon to you. Mark Stout of HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. Continuing now for Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. We don't have a lot to talk about today in terms of any earth-shattering news. No major changes in what we go over in the off-season, which, just to refresh your memory, we take a look at some of the larger puzzle pieces that are going to shape the upcoming hurricane season. Sea surface temperature anomalies, El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomenon, things like that. And then we take a look at lower 48 weather and sometimes maybe a topical topic as we look at the tropics. All right, so there's your alliteration and poetry for today. Starting off with the sea surface temperature anomalies. This updated yesterday. Now this is interesting. Look at what's happening in the equatorial Pacific here. Quite the change recently. We got this cold area showing up right along the equator, and that's really starting to chip away now at the Nino 3.4 region. Bottom line, this is an interesting look now. All of a sudden, much more cold anomalies in the Pacific than we have seen in quite some time, and that includes up here in the North Pacific. We don't have that giant warm blob up there anymore. And then conversely, look at the Atlantic, almost the entire Atlantic, with just the exception of this one area here between the Cabo Verde Islands and the Canary Islands, and then way up in the North Atlantic. Everything's warm relative to average, especially there in the Gulf of Mexico. Quite warm in the Gulf. Quite warm down here in the extreme southeast corner of what we call the main development region. And even these pixels right in here, fairly warm relative to average in and around the eastern Caribbean islands. So you folks in Puerto Rico, the U.S. British Virgin Islands, down through the windwards and leewards, all that water surrounding you, nice and toasty, and a little bit more so than it should be. Nothing alarming yet, but if this kind of pattern remains, where we see, we'll put a negative sign here. That's a horrible negative sign, but I'm trying. And a positive sign here. If this is cooling and this is warming, well, that could make for a busy hurricane season. At least one of the factors. Not everything. Water temperatures aren't everything, but it's a big part of it. And then, boy, look at this. Up in the northwest Atlantic, very, very warm relative to average. And we just had a very powerful Atlantic storm up there. You folks in Newfoundland, you know all about that. Maybe it fed off of some of that anomalously warm water. And if we compare this to just the beginning of the month, yeah, look at the Pacific there especially. I'll draw a box around it so as to draw your attention to this area. Watch the blue box. Look at that. More blues showing up over the last couple of weeks or so. There's January 2nd. Here we are 18 days later. And for the most part, the Atlantic has been roughly the same, generally warmer than average, while we're seeing this cooling trend in the Pacific. Interesting, because we've definitely, or I don't know if you've been paying attention to it, but I've definitely seen some people saying, oh, we're headed towards El Nino. It's an El Nino type state. Well, it might be in the western to central Pacific, in other words, like way over here, but definitely not in the eastern part of the Pacific. We're not having that traditional El Nino where the heat builds off the coast of, that's a yellow, I want red. Give me my colors. We're not seeing it build off this way from east to west like we would see in a traditional setup of El Nino. So while the West Pac and the Central Pacific is a little bit warmer than average, and I'll show you this next graphic in a second, I believe it's all going to be temporary, and some of those models that are indicating a La Nina event, they might be onto something. So let me explain. I don't just make these blanket statements and hope they stick. I try to back it up with evidence. And here you go. This is the subsurface anomalies. And as you can see, I hate the color scheme here. Like all this in here is just noise. Maybe they'll take it back the way it used to be. And once the animation finishes and we stop on the last frame, it'll all make a little bit better sense. But as we started out at the end of November, middle November through December, a lot of upper ocean heat content, warmth here. But watch what happens here as it goes through time. You start to chisel away at some of this here. See, colder water anomalies filtering in. If this will ever quit, I guess I got to ad lib for a second. This shows us that slice, if you will, through the equatorial Pacific. I guess it's just going to loop infinitely. The way they do these GIF animations these days, you never know. It's just going to keep going, isn't it? I got to keep ad-libbing. It shows us a slice through the equatorial Pacific using, I guess they use buoys in this case, with long probes that stick down or float down, sink down, whatever the case may be. It's just not going to quit looping. That's very frustrating, as I wanted it to. Maybe if I go away, it'll stop. Hello, can you? Hey, look, it did. I went away and it stopped looping. It doesn't like me. That's what it is. So this is the current one. It's always going to lag behind. That's January 13th. For whatever reason, this lags behind. I guess they got to collect the data. And they do. They got these buoys out there, and they're strung out, and they have sensors that go down, and they measure these things. And I don't know. It's all computers these days. Computers and ball bearings, right? But what are we showing? Well, a lot of warmth up here at the surface, and it extends down to about 100 meters deep. But we do have this giant area of cold starting to show up. Again, relative to average. That's an anomaly. That's what that means. There's that word right there, anomaly. And I think we're going to really continue to sort of chip away at this large area through here. And since this is a week out, a week old, this cold anomaly has started to surface now already. So we have sort of this upwelling going on, maybe a downwelling over here. It's all part of oceanography and meteorology. But the bottom line is you can look at this and it helps to tell the future. And I think that this is a big signal for the future that we're not seeing another one of these large blobs of warmth show up over here. You can see as well as I can, it's a large blob of cold relative to average. So, as we visit this graphic in the coming weeks, we probably will see more of this blue show up, and even some of this start to chisel away as this stays warm. So that's what we track. That's what we do. We keep up with this in the off season, and eventually, once we get to about April, folks like Dr. Phil Klotzbach will look at all of this, including this data here, as well as model output for the upcoming several months ahead for the state of the El Nino Southern Oscillation, what we call the ENSO phenomenon, and he will make a forecast. He and his team, with numbers, right? 13 named storms, 5 hurricanes, whatever. That comes out in early April, and that'll be at the National Tropical Weather Conference down in South Padre. I'll be there. This is what, this will be the 6th year in a row that I've been there. Looking forward to it. Anyhow, all right, actual sea surface temperatures. Let's switch these. There we go. Start in the Gulf. Yep, it's still there. This, to me, is remarkable. 26 Celsius in the Gulf. So, again, you get off the toe of Louisiana in your boat, head southeast, a couple hundred miles, and bingo, you take a dive off the bow, and the water will be about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Not bad at all. And we're not too many weeks away. What is it? Usually sometime in March that the spring break season starts to begin. I guess it depends on what college or university you go to. But water temperatures, even along the shelf areas, they're chilly, but we haven't had a major Arctic blast until now. And I would expect these temperatures are going to start to come down now. But we really haven't had a lot to come across and agitate all that water, mix it up, what we call cold air advection, where the cold air comes in and it just races across, just windy. It hasn't been that windy with cold air. That's a very fancy term for windy, cold air advection, where the air moves laterally, horizontally, mixes up the water down here through wind, and then puts a blanket of cold air in there. There will be some now because we've had a little bit of an Arctic intrusion, which I'll show you some more about in a minute. But that's remarkable warmth for friggin' late January in the Gulf of Mexico, no doubt. In the Atlantic, very warm water temperatures here as well. Look, there's even a little 26 Celsius right there, south and east of, if you go east of Jacksonville and Fernandina, come out of Savannah, maybe take a boat out of Charleston, you're good to go. Jump off the bow. Make sure you got a life preserver, please. And water temperatures are warm. I mean, that really is remarkable. I'm going to zoom in on that. And let's take a look. 26 Celsius. There's 24 right there. And that little line that I'm drawing in blue, we call that an isotherm, or a line, ISO, equal, therm, in this case temperature. There's 25 Celsius, and there's 26. 80 degrees roughly, right there. That's amazing. And the Atlantic definitely warmer than average, and no major East Coast storms over here to take advantage of that. Sure, if you're in Newfoundland, like we talked about, and you've seen all those pictures and video, the time lapses, etc., feet of snow. One of our subscribers, that term, subscriber makes it's like I send him a magazine each month. One of our supporters, one of our crowdfunding advocates, that's the word. Everything gets changed. You remember, global warming is now climate change, right? Whatever. They're not subscribers. They are crowdfunding advocates. And it's true. His name is Gary, and he lives up in Newfoundland. And the stories he was telling us on our live chat that we have for our crowdfunding advocates, our members, our co-op, were amazing. He was like, you got real-time tweeting. Imagine real-time chatting where he's literally typing in and we see. I mean, the only thing that would have been better is if he was live streaming. But that was a heck of a snowstorm, and it was a hurricane force Atlantic storm with very cold air. And you folks in Newfoundland, you really endured that. I wish I could have been up there for that in person. That is right up my alley in the off season. Hurricane force winds, heavy snow. It's just 30 or 40 degrees colder than what I'm used to dealing with. All right. Speaking of Canada, and what a great segue, this is remarkable. And I'm not going to get into this too much because I don't want to go off on some tangent that I don't know a lot about. Remember, Mark here does not know everything, and I try not to pretend like I know everything, and I admit that I don't know everything, but I do know enough to talk about most things. Does that make sense? So, this from Ryan Maui, who knows more than me. We'll give him credit there, right? A remarkable tweet, and the subject of that tweet is even more so that the Canadian Weather Modeling Agency is flipping the switch on a new supercomputer. Excuse me. The dry air taking effect on me, with a 2.5 times increase in performance. Huge, he says. Over the past 3 months, the Canadian model, the CMC as we call it, has moved ahead of the U.S. NOAA Global Weather Model in skill metrics. And you can read all about it there. Follow Dr. Maui on Twitter. You want to know who he is? I mean, he's knocking on the door of 100,000 followers. This guy. Cat 6, I like that. You see that? He knows what he's talking about, and so read it if you dare. And I mean, this is amazing. So congratulations. Let me get me back. Come on. Doggone it. There we go. I need my keyboard shortcuts to work. Congratulations, Canada. All right. Good job up there. The Canadian Weather Service, etc., the computing powers. I was in Toronto this past May, working with Discovery Channel Canada on a hurricane documentary they did about Matthew, and it has nothing to do with anything except I'm telling you I was in Toronto, a beautiful city, and now you guys are going to have one of the most powerful weather modeling machines in the world. So good job. The Canadian used to be called the crazy uncle by some, the model, not any particular Canadians, but seriously, it got a lot of ridicule on the web. Forget it, it's the Canadian. Well, who's laughing now, huh? So the U.S. got to get on it. Get that computing power up, or we're going to be relying on the euro and the Canadian more and more. Hey, you know what? As long as it gives us a good forecast, I don't care. I just want a reliable forecast when it comes to hurricanes and how much feet of snow you're going to get in Newfoundland, right? So very interesting. Check that out from Dr. Maui on Twitter. Amazing. All right, so lower 48, cold, winter's back. No big storms right now. They've exited the building, so to speak. But look down here. I draw your attention to the southeast and Florida, where we have freeze warnings, freeze watches, all kinds of problems, citrus and otherwise. People down there, the snowbirds, the Florida natives, you're going to have to put your coats on, your sweaters, and so forth. There's going to be a heck of a storm that's going to get its genesis over here and move out past Bermuda. I'll look at that in a moment. But first, I tweeted this earlier. I got this from the National Weather Service. I laugh, but it's real, man. This is not your weather fake news. The iguana population, lots of iguanas down there. I've seen them. They do exist. I've visited the Hurricane Research Division out in Key Biscayne, Virginia Key, whatever it is down there, and I've seen those iguanas running across the parking lot. And now they could be falling out of the trees because it gets cold, and those are, of course, reptiles, and they don't freeze. You don't have literally 32-degree or whatever frozen iguanas, but they get cold to the point where they just kind of lose their grip and they fall out of the trees, and it's a problem, and it's serious. And I've tweeted it kind of being funny, but sometimes you can use humor to bring a point across. South Florida tonight, Palm Beach 40, wow. Interior Gulf Coast area 30s, yikes. So seriously though, if you see an iguana that fell out of a tree, I don't know, I guess they're not dead, so just leave them alone. Maybe put them somewhere where they don't get hurt, and be aware of it. Kind of a cold snap down there in Florida. All right. So I mentioned, and what we do also in this off-season update, we go over lower 48 weather. We're on the lookout, right? Get the old binoculars. Any big storms coming? Anything disruptive? Anything that I might be able to go out in if I can? Depending on where it is, that's what we look out for, just keeping you weather aware. And this time, you folks in Bermuda, and I got a few of you there that watch these updates, including a couple of crowdfunding advocates. Howard, talking to you for one. Where is Bermuda? Right there, okay? So there's Bermuda. I'm going to get rid of me for a moment. Let's put this into motion here using the old arrow keys. Watch what happens. Low pressure develops off the southeast coast. Bermuda is circled there. You're going to get some heavy rain, my friend. And a decent low pressure area is going to scoot by. Pretty good wind coming in from the east. And a slow mover, and then off it goes. Back it up a little bit. That's coming up here between the next 24 to 48 hours. And then that storm scoots out. You know what the real bummer here is? If this had gotten its act together and moved up the coast like this, I would be getting ready to enjoy my own couple of feet of snow. But such is not the case, and oh well. Let me go back here because I want to. Come on. There we go. Show you the full picture of the lower 48. We stretched this out to include everything south of Canada and Mexico, etc., north of Mexico, the lower 48. Pacific storm, coming in, no big time. Like, it's just run-of-the-mill winter storms. Nothing that we can't handle. You see that? Maybe some snow for New England here this late in the weekend, through the weekend, whatever. But not a big-time knockout blizzard, ridiculously low pressures and things like that. But do be aware, seriously, pointing this out, just keeping you up to date. There's a little bit of a nor'easter, no big deal, you can handle it, but it's there as we round out the month of January into February. If this will go, come on. Da-da-da. There we go. I love this software, but sometimes the keyboard shortcuts just give me fits. We're out at about 6 days, 7 days, and as you can see, the map stays progressive. The storms come in and out, but no blockbusters, no, like what we just had in Newfoundland as an example. Nothing like that for the lower 48. So I guess that's good because, even severe winter weather can cost lives, and it's very disruptive. It's very exciting, true, but you also have to understand it can be a big problem, and we want to take that very seriously. So kind of a mundane, run-of-the-mill pattern over the next week or so as far as lower 48 weather. What else did I want to talk about today? I think that's about it. Just a real quick reminder, I am on Twitter, at HurricaneTrack. I talked about Dr. Maui. He's on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter. Also on Patreon. That's how we do our crowdfunding advocacy, is through Patreon. So go to patreon.com/HurricaneTrack to learn more. Our podcast series is exclusively on Patreon. Stories from the Hurricane Highway. Our new television type series, The Hurricane Highway, a web series that I'm developing. It debuts, the pilot episode, early next month. wrapping that up, the first episode anyway, and they will all drop by the time we get through May, and then they'll all be on Amazon Prime starting in June. And we got conference season coming up, the National Tropical Weather Conference in South Padre Island, the National Hurricane Conference, that's in April. Both of these are in April. And all of these are just around the corner. I mean, my goodness, in a week, we will almost be done with January. Hooray. So there you go. That is it from me. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, which I guess where else would you be watching, right? But subscribe and hit the notification bell. Ring the bell for more videos in the future. We will get more active as we get closer to hurricane season. Oh, you know what? I'm going to bring me back on. I forgot one thing. If you are on Instagram, you don't got to rush out and do it right now. I've been on Instagram for a number of years, but I took a couple of years off because I really didn't know what I was going to do with Instagram. I am on Instagram. Remember, everything that I do is pretty much that right there, at HurricaneTrack. That's the brand. Either HurricaneTrack, all one word, or that logo right there. That's what you look for. The seal of approval. That's how you know it's me and my team. I'm going to be doing more on Instagram starting this year. And what that is, we'll talk about it later, but I am on Instagram. If you want to follow, I'm also there. So I wanted to tease that and let you know about that. So one more thing to talk about. Instagram, HurricaneTrack on Twitter, YouTube, Patreon. Just not Snapchat. I don't think that'll ever happen. Sorry, kids, not doing the Snapchat thing. Now I can sign off with that bad news. Hey, look, thanks for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Keep the iguanas warm if you can, or whatever you're supposed to do. Watch out for them. Stay warm yourselves. As always, thank you for watching and listening to me on whatever device you're doing so from. I appreciate it more than you know. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. We'll talk again early next week.